The other thing is that that's actually quite unique to the North Korean threat actors is that they're operating in a very, very low trust environment, right? North Korea on the whole, but especially within these operations, like the individual operators, the individual like hackers or money launderers really have nobody, like their bosses don't trust them. Their peers don't trust them, right? Like they're I think like Western culture around like teams and management and empowering your team, it does not exist in North Korea.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Unchained, your no-hype resource for all things crypto. I'm your host, Laura Shin. We are now featuring quotes from listeners on the show. Today, we have comments responding to my interview with CoinDesk's Danny Nelson about the Libra scandal. On X, Oversighter writes, quote, "The meme coin market is being deliberately crushed. The global financial system is changing, and cryptocurrency is being integrated. This circus with the characters is just noise." Also on X, ZenBTC says, quote, "Meme coins will survive anything, but the real story is Bitcoin adoption in Argentina is inevitable." To have your comment featured, write a review of the podcast overall, or leave a comment on our video on YouTube or X. This is the February 25th, 2025 episode of Unchained. Mantle is building the largest sustainable hub for on-chain finance, launching 3 new products: Enhanced Index Fund for optimized crypto exposure, Mantle Banking for seamless daily financial experience, and Mantle X for AI-powered innovation. Learn more at group.mantle.xyz. Crypto moves fast. It's why Bitwise launched the weekly CIO Memo, a jargon-free summary of what's moving crypto markets, written by one of the best in the business, CIO Matt Hogan. Get up to speed in 5 minutes or less. Check it out at bitwiseinvestments.com/CIO Memo. Carefully consider the extreme risks associated with crypto before investing. Today's topic is the $1.5 billion Bybit hack. Here to discuss are Taylor Monahan, security at MetaMask, and Jonty, a senior investigator at Zero Shadow. Welcome, Taylor and Jonty.
Thanks for having us, Laura.
Thank you, Laura. Thanks for inviting us on.
And just a heads up for video watchers, Jonty is not on camera for reasons that we will get into in a moment. So on Friday, crypto exchange Bybit was hacked for just over 400,000 ETH, which was worth, so the ETH itself was worth $1.1 billion. And then when you throw in the other types of ETH, including, for instance, staked Ether or METH, that totals $1.5 billion. This was the largest hack in crypto history. It also appears to be the largest hack ever in all history. Before we dive into the details, let's start with both of your backgrounds and your roles. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your history working in crypto security, how you came to know of the hack, and then what role you've played in the aftermath. Taylor, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, thanks, Laura. So I've been in crypto for a while. I've been building wallets for a while. My official job is security at MetaMask. So I do all sorts of stuff with the security teams to make sure that our product is secure, improve the product for end users so that they can be more secure, that sort of stuff. A large portion of my role these days focuses on tracking the threat actors and following them, understanding them, and hopefully trying to get better outcomes, not just for our users, but for the entire ecosystem. And in the last couple of years, I've really focused on what I consider to be the largest threat, which is Lazarus Group, or DPRK, we kind of call them. And so these are North Korean state-backed hackers who are incredibly prevalent in the crypto industry, do a huge amount of damage, and they're a bit of a unique threat, which we'll get into. And so I end up doing a whole bunch of incident response, meaning that when something bad happens, we help out the teams. And I also do a lot of tracing and tracking to understand what they're doing. And I've worked with Jonty specifically on like the Lazarus Group, their thefts, their tactics for a couple years now. So it's been a bit.
Yeah, so my name's Jonty. I work for a company called Zero Shadow. We're a Web3 security and incident response company. So we help crypto companies around the world firstly prevent, but also respond to incidents like the Bybit incident the other day. And really, as an investigator there, my role is to track, trace, recover assets, work in very close collaboration with all sorts of industry partners to warn them of funds that potentially they're handling related to specific incidents, and then also work with law enforcement to actually recover those funds for victims. Victims are very wide-ranging, but as Taylor just mentioned, working in crypto incident response, there is a massive overlap with the activities of DPRK, North Korea, because some of the largest hacks in this industry have originated from there. So I've been looking at North Korea for a number of years now. I used to work for a company called Elliptic, and it's an endlessly fascinating threat actor that I guess the one point we will get into is everybody in this industry should be worried about.
Yeah, I think I've said this on the show, but also my ancestors are from North Korea. I got very, very interested in North Korea about 15 years ago. A random friend of mine who is not Korean in any way just decided to give me this book that's about North Korea. And I became kind of obsessed with the country after that. So, all right, let us now get into what happened here with this Bybit hack. Why don't we just start with like what Bybit's security setup was and how they normally signed transactions. And then from there, we can go into like what actually happened.
Okay, so exchanges operate they basically have a large amount of infrastructure. Some of it's automated, right? When you deposit into the exchange, those deposits are swept into the exchange's wallets. Over time, the industry has actually improved. It used to be that all of the funds would just be stored in this one wallet. Over time, we realized that that might be a bad idea. And so today, most exchanges have sort of a variety of different wallets. They'll have what they call like a hot wallet, which is the traditional, very active. It's on the infrastructure. It's sweeping, it's holding. And today, usually they limit the hot wallet to be maybe 5%, maybe 10% of the assets.
And by the way, you said on the infrastructure, but I think you meant on the internet, like it's connected to the internet. Okay.
Yeah. It's like it's on, if they're using AWS, for example, all that the hot wallet cluster will be on their AWS. It'll be automated, connected. And the reason why we don't put all the money there anymore is because if someone gets access to the AWS, it's relatively easy for them to just take the entire hot wallet, for example. And so as sort of in response to the years of hacks against this industry, today you have the hot wallet, which has a certain amount of funds. You'll have cold storage, which is sort of like reserves, and it's not touched as much. Ideally, it's completely offline and completely segregated from the network, and it's very limited access. And a lot of things have to happen for money to like move from the cold wallet. And then you'll also hear a term today, which is a warm wallet, which is it's usually a wallet or wallets that are not necessarily kept completely offline and completely segregated. However, it's also not like deeply integrated into the hot infrastructure. It's not always connected to the internet. It's not accessible everywhere. And so how the exchange generally works is that the hot wallet is processing all the transactions at a rapid clip 24/7 in an automated fashion. And then the exchange will have processes to move when they need like certain funds or certain asset. They'll move from hot to warm. They'll move from warm to hot. They'll move from cold to warm. They have all different processes for this. And in the case of Bybit, some of the warm/cold wallets were using Gnosis safe multisigs, which were backed by hardware wallets. And that's where a huge amount of money was in this case, that the wallet that had the funds stolen had $1.5 billion in it. They also have other wallets that were not compromised that have many more billions of dollars in them. And so basically what happened was that as they were attempting to move money from one wallet to the next as part of their operations, this was like a human process. It required multiple signers due to Lazarus being, I guess, inside their devices or systems. When they attempted to make that move, instead of it going where it should have gone, they signed a transaction that actually just gave Lazarus control of that multi-sig, which held all those funds. And then ultimately Lazarus was able to take those funds, obviously, for themselves.
Oh my gosh, yeah, the whole thing is just so breathtaking. When you say it was a multi-sig, so normally multi-sigs have some subset of of signers amidst a larger potential number of signers, so like a 3 of 5 situation, or one of 3, or whatever. But do you know what the numbers were for their multi-sig?
It required 3 distinct signers. I don't know what the total number was, but it was likely like a 3 of 5 or maybe a 3 of 6. But there were 3 separate individuals who signed the transaction. We do know that.
Okay, so how common is this setup? Like, was there any part of it when you're looking at it? And I know, so Jonty is actively like working on some of the investigation, so I don't think he can talk too specifically about Bybit itself. Although I guess Jonty, you can tell me, whenever you can't answer something. But I wondered, is there anything about the setup that looks to you like, oh, like actually, it differs slightly from best practices in this or that way?
So I can't talk about Bybit specifically, as you say. Zero Shadow is involved in that investigation. It's ongoing, and I don't want to prejudge anything there. But just talking generally about how North Korea hacks exchanges, actually often the issues are the humans, not the infrastructure or the security, actual technical security they have in place. The operational security and the practices at not just exchanges, but protocols, etc., is often the point of fault that DPRK find to hack these large amounts. Certainly, it's very common to see that sort of cold, warm, hot wallet structure at most major exchanges. But the difference between exchanges that have what I would refer to as very high grade security and exchanges that maybe could improve is how they actually interact with those systems, more often than not. Obviously, there are cases where actual technical security can be improved, but I'd say where you see very large exchange hacks, like the case of Bybit or other sort of hacks that have been attributed to North Korea in the past, it's often a human at the end that has been socially engineered or made some mistake that has resulted in this one.
Yeah, well, actually, there's one analogy I meant to give earlier to help people understand the cold, warm, and hot wallet analogy, which is you could think of the hot wallet as being similar to your checking account, the warm wallet as being similar to savings, and then the cold wallet as being similar to a vault or something like that, where, for the vault, there would be like a time delay and like, moving the money out, et cetera. Savings, easier access, but yeah, not as readily accessible as your checking. So anyway, hopefully that helps, because I did see questions about that. So one other question before we dive into more details on this particular hack. Do you think that other groups that use Gnosis safe multi-sig should be concerned? Or I guess, yeah, it is. If the actual attack vector was more social engineering, then it maybe isn't even just Gnosis safe. It's like literally any multi-sig. Or
Yep. Yeah. So whenever there's a large hack, I think people are very quick to look at the specific products, the specific structure, the specific wallets. But in general, especially with Lazarus, it really doesn't matter. You can use any wallet, you can use any setup. One of the things that they do is that when they get that initial access to like the human's device, they'll just sit and watch you, and they'll first understand your operations and what you're doing. And so there's not a single product out there that will like perfectly save you. Like they're just going to watch how you use it. They're going to watch what the structure is. They're going to understand your systems, and then they're going to come up with a very custom plan that they've really like tailored to you. And so in the case of Radiant, for example, they were all of the signers were using different devices. They were using both Trezors and ledgers. They were using Frame and Rabby. Like they were all different, and it really didn't trip up Lazarus whatsoever. They just were like, oh, okay, so these are the wallets that we need to figure out how to maneuver around. In the case of Bybit, they have hardware wallets, and then they have the Gnosis Safe, which is the industry standard for Ethereum for a multi-sig. There are some, I guess, difficulties or challenges with specifically, I guess, like the Gnosis Safe structure or it's not even really the gnosis safe though, right? It's how the EVM works. And when you're signing a transaction, it's not always clear what you're signing. There's a lot of strings and bits of data that are not human readable. They're just like these numbers and letters. And so ultimately, in my opinion, it's not necessarily like the gnosis safe that should worry people. It's the fact that even today, it's very hard to have like full confidence and full knowledge in what you're signing. And so if your device is compromised, even though you have your hardware wallet that's separate, if you can't understand what you're signing on that hardware wallet screen, it doesn't, that they can basically trick you into signing anything, and you just have to grit your teeth and sign it, because there's what else are you going to do, right? And I think that's one area that not just knows it's safe, but all of us need to work together to improve, to make sure that we're not setting people up for failure. We have proper product integrations at every layer of the stack where you can see, right? Your hardware wallet's going to tell you what you're signing, and you're going to understand the implications of that.
Could there be some kind of Ethereum improvement proposal to address that issue about how... So basically, this attack, as far as I understand it, is called a blind signing attack, where you think you're signing one thing, but you're actually signing something else under the hood that you can't see. But could Ethereum change it by doing some kind of upgrade to address that problem?
Yeah, so it's sort of at this in-between layer where it's not necessarily fully at the core of Ethereum. It's almost like an interoperable standard between, all the wallets and all the different dApps and all the different multi-sigs and stuff sort of agree on. Like, this is how we're going to pass data back and forth to one another, and these are the controls. I think the EIP layer is probably like a new EIP that really figures out the best way to do this and builds on the prior, EIPs that we have for signing, is probably a good idea to get on sooner rather than later, in my opinion.
I'd say, just to add to this, I think there's actually a lot of very simple steps that people can take to sort of mitigate attacks in this way. One thing I'd like to call out on this podcast for anybody who's listening who is potentially a signer on Gnosis Safe or is self-custodying a large amount of crypto, Pascal, the leader of SEAL 911, has created a very helpful utility that's open source and public on his GitHub, completely free to use. And it's essentially a bash script that checks that the safe transaction that you are signing is the one that you intend to sign. I would highly encourage anybody who is signing transactions involving Gnosis safes and large amounts of money uses that utility before they press the two buttons. In many cases, that tool alone is enough to realize something is wrong and not press those two buttons that could spell the end of your protocol exchange, whatever.
And so, just to understand that tool, if Bybit had used such a tool, then would it have revealed that actually they were signing the ability for this other actor to change the code of the contract? Because that's essentially what happened, right? When they signed it, instead they changed the smart contract in some way. Should I say that?
Not just in the Bybit case, but there are many cases where alerts could have been raised using tools like this, which could have meant that people chose a different course of action and didn't sign the malicious transaction.
Yeah,
okay.
It throws a couple of red flags. One is, it's not necessarily that the tool is going to like reveal exactly what you're signing, but it's going to reveal that there's some mismatches, right? Like what you're seeing on the hardware wallet doesn't match what you're seeing on your computer screen, which is a red flag in itself. The other thing is that in order for this hack to be executed, more transactions have to like be constructed than you're aware of. So typically if you're signing a transaction, there's just one transaction that's sort of in the queue and you're going to go sign it. What this tool does is it looks sort of like more deeply at all of the transactions. And if it starts seeing multiple transactions with like the same nonce, which is the sort of unique identifier of the transaction, it's going to throw a red flag there too. So, you can imagine that. So like the user thinks they're signing one transaction with a nonce of say 72, right? Just a number. What's happening on the background is that Lazarus has inserted their own transaction, but it's also going to have a nonce of 72. Normally, you can't see this, right? However, if you use a tool, there's a more than likely chance that you will be able to at least be aware that there's like these two transactions floating in the space. And again, like that is a red flag. And it's something that this tool specifically calls out. And again, like it's not a perfect solution, but the idea is with the current technology and how the products currently work, it will raise red flags. And then ideally people like stop what they're doing and investigate more deeply rather than, again, clicking the button on the hardware wallet. Because that's how the hacks happen.
I think another quick thing I would say is you should be paranoid when you're making these transactions. It might be routine and it might be something you do all the time, but it really does have the capacity to completely nuke your exchange or protocol or whatever it is. So if things aren't add up, or you're getting errors or something weird is happening, just stop what you're doing and investigate. It's really not worth the risk. Too many people encounter issues and just try and brute force their way through it because it's a natural human thing to do. You know, I'm sure anybody who just wants to get stuff done, get home, go hang out or whatever, will try and rattle through this. But what they don't realize is that they're potentially putting a lot of user funds and their protocol at risk by doing so. So yeah, be paranoid or unfortunately suffer the consequences.
Yeah, so in a moment, we'll talk a little bit more about how it is that North Korea was able to get into the systems of Bybit. But first, a quick word from the sponsors who make this show possible. Mantle is transforming the future of on-chain finance. With a $4 billion treasury and successful products like Mantle Network and METH Protocol and Ignition FBTC, Mantle is launching 3 new innovation pillars that will bridge blockchain with everyday banking. Enhanced Index Fund, offering optimized exposure to BTC, ETH, SOL, and USD through advanced staking opportunities. Mantle Banking will deliver seamless blockchain-powered services. Mantle X brings AI innovation to decentralized finance. Experience the future of finance with Mantle. Follow Mantle on X to learn more about the next generation of on-chain finance.
Hi, I'm Matt Hogan, CIO of crypto asset manager Bitwise. Look, crypto can be confusing. There's so much noise and the space changes so quickly. That's why, every week, I write a 5-minute memo on the biggest stories impacting crypto, in plain English. Why is Bitcoin up or down? What are people missing? Where should investors look next? Get the lowdown every week. Sign up to get the weekly CIO memo delivered straight to your inbox. Go to bitwiseinvestments.com/CIO memo. That's bitwiseinvestments.com/CIO memo.
Carefully consider the extreme risks associated with crypto before investing.
We have more listener comments responding to the episode on the Libra scandal, in particular, the extent of Argentine President Javier Milei's involvement. On YouTube, Barrister M. Bowler 4867 writes, Milei is no victim, he's a crook. Also on YouTube, On-Chain Education says, quote, he was a victim, in my opinion, but his original intention was probably to extract. If you have a burning opinion or a spicy take you'd like to share, please write a review or leave a comment on an episode on YouTube or X. Back to my conversation with Taylor and Jonty. I did see shortly after the hack that Ben Zhao, of the CEO of Bybit, tweeted, please rest assured that all other cold wallets are secure. And, you know, that was interesting to me that they somehow had narrowed things down enough. Maybe they understood enough about how the attack occurred in order to say that. But, I don't know if you can reveal how it was that they knew so quickly that all the other ones were secure. Because I feel like if I knew that they had been in my systems in some way, I think I would be incredibly freaked out. But yeah, I was just curious about that.
Yeah, okay. So to be clear, I don't know. Like I have not reviewed the full timeline and the incident response. So some of this is going to be a bit speculative, but the first thing to understand is that like the nature of this hack is pretty dang specific. And for example, if your entire AWS just gets completely owned and all your hot wallets get owned, for you to go out and say that like our AWS is secure would be a really silly thing to say. However, in this case, due to how the attack was executed and most likely like, the preliminary investigation that the team was able to do, I think the reason that they were confident that the cold wallets were secure is that, one, they know that those wallets are actually on segregated infrastructure, like completely separate and cut out. And the other thing is that so long as they themselves don't touch it, right, don't go signing transactions, even if, say, like all the devices are compromised or all the hot devices are compromised, right? So long as they don't go touch the cold stuff, then they are secure. And I think that's, it's I'm pretty dang sure that was the approach that they took, right? Is like they really did just like press pause on doing any big transfers as they were going through the investigation.
What I'm confused about is I thought that I heard that they had seen a 50% drawdown in their assets. Was that the right percentage? Do you guys know?
There were huge outflows pretty
so
quickly.
If the hot wallet only has like 5%, that's why I don't know if they could have gotten away without touching any of the other cold wallets.
Well, and later on they did have to top up the hot wallets at one point. However, I'm not sure that they moved from cold, basically. They've been working with a lot of industry partners and things to, both de-risk the situation as the investigation, the forensics are done on the devices, but also, you want to, it was a priority for them, clearly, to not like completely turn off the exchange and potentially impact, all their legitimate users. And so they have prioritized that, and they've been working with other exchanges and their partners and investors and people in the space to make sure that, their operations are not only secure on the one end, but, users are not locked out, right?
Yeah.
Like they're not just saying like,
yeah, you can't withdraw. Yeah, they're allowing everybody to withdraw. I just realized actually one other possible theory is that since it was only Ether that was taken, that they realized any other type of cold storage for other assets might be okay. And some, I'm just speculating, but like they got the bridge loan so that they could cover any Ether withdrawals. And then, maybe they realized like, oh, actually like these Bitcoin wallets or these Solana wallets or, whatever the other assets are, like those are safe. So I'm just speculating. I'm not.
Yeah, I'm in in this specific area, I'm speculating as well because I don't have a full like rundown on their systems. And there are other, like they have real cyber forensic incident response doing like full forensics on the devices. They're going to find the full intrusion set. They're going to go through every single log. They're going to determine exactly what happened. Like if malware was used, they're going to do full malware analysis and understand very precisely, right? Like when did they get access? How did they get access? Who did they get access to? How they move through the systems? And that investigation is obviously still ongoing. It's going to take a couple months to get the full picture. But even just initially, they know their systems. They're not, they've been doing this a while. So they can, based on what happened, based on what they know, based on their systems, they do know like what, they have some sense of what's going on and what's, a reasonable versus unreasonable risk to take given the situation.
So there is one question that I did also have about the setup, which is I heard Ben say I think this was a Spaces that he did. I know that Ron Nooner was the host, but I can't remember which group hosted the space, but we'll put this in the show notes. I did hear him say that they had 70% of all their clients' ETH in that one cold wallet. And that to me was, I was like, wow, I'm not even an exchange person, but I don't know if I would ever put 70% of any type of asset in one cold wallet. Because basically, so the transaction that they thought they signed was to only move 30,000 ETH from the wallet.
Right.
But like I said, the hackers changed the contract so that they were able to obtain more than 400,000 ETH. So
Yeah.
I wondered, is there some kind of standard about what is a reasonable amount to put in one wallet?
Well, the standard used to be all of it in your one hot wallet. So
Well, that was probably abandoned a very long time ago, right?
yeah, I don't think there's so there's not like a hard standard that the industry has decided on. It's up to the exchange and their operations to understand how much they can separate each, different pile out. I think that after this incident, I think both Bybit but also other exchanges are going to reevaluate exactly what those percentages are and evaluate, like, if this thing gets compromised, what harm is done.
Do you know for other exchanges what you, and you don't have to name any of the exchanges, but do you just know what typical percentages are?
So typically they try to limit, like, I know, like, the hot wallet, typically, like, just broadly speaking, it's like less than 10% should be on your hot wallet. I think what makes it more complex today is that it's not like in this case, in the Lazarus case, there was another attack on Bitcoin DMM that was very similar, but it was a Bitcoin only exchange. What complicates it is that it used to be you had just hot, and then you had hot and cold, and now you have this sort of intermediary warm. And so, even if you're saying that the hot wallet is going to be limited to, say, 5%, if your warm wallet has 95%, I think we've learned that that's probably not a viable position. But because everything's so rapidly evolving, I don't think that there's an industry standard. I think that everyone should be really deeply, like, looking at and assuming that the warm wallet can be compromised and even the cold wallet can be compromised, and making sure that it's not necessarily that, like, it's just the hot wallet that's at risk. Like, all the wallets are potentially at risk. Let's not put $1 billion in any one wallet anymore.
Yes, for the good of everybody, minus North Korea. Okay, so I know we have kept saying that it's North Korea who did this hack, et cetera, but we have not gone into the evidence. So can you guys explain what the evidence is that points to North Korea, and specifically an entity within it? Really, it's not really within it. It's an entity that works directly for the government called the Lazarus Group. Because basically, just for people to understand, like, everyday people in North Korea, they are not, like, logging onto the internet and using crypto. Like, only the most elite people who benefit from the dictatorship get to do things like go on the internet and leave North Korea and all that. So they are the ones who are trained to do that. They do it specifically for the government, so the government can avoid sanctions and fund their nuclear program. So that is the purpose. It is not everyday North Koreans. Those people are oppressed. They are not even allowed to listen to a song from outside of North Korea. They're not allowed to watch a movie or a TV show. You can be sent to prison for consuming pop culture outside of North Korea. So yes, this is just people who are trained by the government to do hacking on the government's behalf. Yeah. So what is the evidence that it's the Lazarus Group?
Jonty, can you go into any of this broadly?
I can go into some broadly and talk about attribution in general. So attribution is a really tricky problem, both, like, just in the traditional cyber world, but also we're sort of doing slightly separate attribution, if you like, based on how an entity A hacks a crypto company, but also B then subsequently launders their money. And actually often following the money is a good way to try and work out who is behind a given attack. So I think it's already very public that in the initial stages of the laundering, the stolen funds have been sent to wallets which commingle the proceeds of other attacks. So what the attacks that have definitely commingled funds with the Bybit attack include the Poloniex hack, the BingX hack, and the Indodax hack. Several of those have been previously publicly attributed to North Korea, not only by ourselves, but also by sort of government agencies across the world.
And actually, wait, sorry, Jonty, just to ask you, you said Indodax. Did you mean the Femex?
Femex as well, yeah.
Okay.
So Femex would be another example. But I'm talking about exchange hacks that have been very publicly attributed to a specific North Korean threat actor known as Trader. I'd highlight those for you. But what this means is we can say certainly the same entity that is is involved in laundering the proceeds of all of these hacks. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're all the same perpetrator, but actually what we've observed in observing this particular threat actor over the years is that they launder only their own money. They never really commingle funds with hacks that have been perpetrated by another source. So that is one really big bit of evidence. Just by following the money, you could use potentially to attribute this hack. The other things we look at are in the sort of traditional cyber world called tactics, techniques, and procedures. So these are sort of the ways in which a particular threat actor goes about their attack and sort of the subsequent laundering. It's probably of no surprise that North Korea, and particularly Trader, is by far and away the most sophisticated crypto money laundering entity in the world. And what that means is for an investigator like me and Taylor, who try and track these assets all the time, there is a particular sophistication and signature that is left by the launderers of these funds that really you get to a point where the only solution is North Korea. We also use things like device indicators and typical tactics and techniques around what services, particularly Trader like to use to launder their money. But all of this is to build an intelligence picture that will allow us to attribute with a certain degree of confidence a hack to North Korea. Hopefully that gives you sort of a brief overview.
Yeah. Well, there was one thing that I noticed so Arkham Intelligence put out a bounty for resolving who perpetrated the hack, and then Zach XBT solved it and showed that the hackers sent some portion of the funds to the same wallets that had been involved in Femex, BingX, and the Poloniex hacks. And what was interesting was, I don't know if you guys noticed this, but for those transactions where they sent some amount of the funds of all of those hacks to these same wallets, that is how he was able to connect, that it's the same hackers who did those other hacks, was the hackers sent only a tiny amount from all those hacks into those other addresses. Mm-hmm. And looking at, like let's say they had stolen 10,000 Ether or something. Like one of the hacks, the BingX one, where they had transferred that tiny bit to this other wallet that again had also received a tiny bit from one of the other hacks. I think it was Bybit. They only sent 0.00195 ETH, which was about $5.25 the day of, it was only last week, so it's very similar to the current price, but there's just something about that where I saw that and it made me feel like they want us to know that it's them. And they're just putting a tiny bit of change from the hack in these wallets so that we can connect the dots. And somehow it felt very like foreboding or taunting. I realize I'm interpreting a lot of this, but what did you make of the fact that that's how they're doing that?
So I don't think they're taunting. They actually, they don't have a ton of awareness of like the conversation about them, surprisingly enough. They're just, they're focused on like laundering the money and being efficient. The other thing is that's actually quite unique to the North Korean threat actors is that they're operating in a very, very low trust environment, right? North Korea on the whole, but especially within these operations, like the individual operators, the individual like hackers or money launderers really have nobody, like their bosses don't trust them. Their peers don't trust them, right? Like they're I think like Western culture around like teams and management and empowering your team, it does not exist in North Korea. And so a lot of times what we see is that, when they're laundering, there's a lot of like handoffs where it seems like they're handing off the funds to like maybe their boss or to the next team or the next shift or something. And the other thing that we see, which I call dust collection, is that a lot of times someone comes in later after and sort of like does a sweep of all the wallets that were used for a prior laundering and make sure that they got all the funds. Because again, they're using like the laundering process is like thousands of addresses a day, right? Funds like being split up and being consolidated and bridging and going back and forth. And so a lot of times they'll like have this pile of money that's moving through space and time, through all these different addresses. But either like another team or maybe their boss or something is going in and making sure that they got all of the money after the fact, right? They didn't accidentally lose an address or, leave 100 ETH somewhere. And we call it dust collecting because sometimes you'll see, a large number of wallets, if they had 0.1 ETH or 0.01 ETH or 1 ETH or whatever, those will all get consolidated sort of into a separate track. And it's very interesting, but it's very unique to North Korea because they have a huge number of people who are doing these operations. Whereas, say, like your typical DeFi hacker is typically operating as like a lone wolf, right? They don't have to hand off. They don't have to and they also don't have the ability they don't have the ability to send thousands of transactions manually, at the same time, right? Like you can see these threads with the North Korean laundering that it requires a huge number of people to be each individually moving the money at the same time.
Like meaning they don't have tools to automate that? Or what do you mean?
They do automate. Jonty, do you want to go into this?
Sure. So they certainly have some tools that help them with laundering, but it's very clear that there are a large number of humans involved in this process. It's humans using tools. It's not like some AI or whatever is doing all the money laundering for them. Ultimately, humans do a lot of this, and humans make mistakes sometimes. Another thing I wanted to draw out though is like a key difference between North Korea and other threat actors is that North Korea really don't care if we work out that a hack is perpetrated by North Korea after the fact. They're never going to get arrested. No one's going to go to Pyongyang and put these guys in handcuffs. So really, they're optimizing for something completely different than a lot of other hackers. If you're a Western hacker, you've got to be worried about the FBI coming and knocking on your door, right? Whereas they're optimizing for speed and mitigating the risk that their funds are intercepted. And the two things look different on chain. So like if we 24 hours after the fact can say, oh, because of XYZ reason, they've commingled these funds, therefore this hack is definitely North Korea. They don't care if they've already converted those funds to cash. And really, it's a very different approach than is taken by other threat actors, where often laundering is very slow, methodical, and they're really trying to conceal their identity as the thing they're optimizing for versus trying to just move the money as quick as possible.
Okay, this is just so fascinating. I have so many questions, but Taylor, I did want to ask about something that you asked or that you said before, where you said they don't seem to have a lot of knowledge of what we're saying about them. How have you figured that out?
So there's always a concern that when like myself or ZachXBT or anyone really say like tweets something, that will have an impact on what the threat actors are doing. You can use this to your advantage, right? You can like tweet some things that make them hopefully like go in a certain direction. They can also have disadvantages, right? Like if you reveal your hand in a certain way, they might say like, oh, that's a good idea. Let me go screw with them some more or whatever. Historically, there are things where like certain knowledge was, or certain information was either tweeted about or like made like sort of crypto mainstream media, right? Like the Block would do a big article on it, or DL News would do a big article. Someone would do a big article on something where you would assume that if these threat actors were reading that, they would change their activity. It would impact how they acted. And it does with DeFi hackers, right? Like you'll see their tradecraft does evolve over time. They'll actually like kind of respond to each other as well. Like if one of the other DeFi hackers screws up, you'll see the next DeFi hacker be very careful not to make the same mistake. But with the North Koreans, it's just different. I think the best way to put it is like Jonty said, like they are really just optimizing for efficiency and not having their funds frozen. They really, everything else is sort of just fluff to them. They're not trying to be clever. They're not trying to like outsmart us necessarily. Like, if they get the funds out, that's a win. If they don't, they've lost, and they don't need to overthink the social conversation that's happening, especially in the West.
I think this is not to say that North Korea hasn't evolved their tactics over time, though. We are in a very different space today than we are 5 years ago with regards to North Korean laundering. And that is directly as a result of exchanges and services in the crypto industry taking actions to mitigate their exchange protocol being abused by North Korea for money laundering. So as a really clear example of this, you will never see trader deposit 7 figures of funds onto an exchange at any given time, because they've learned over the course of laundering lots of money for lots of years that if they keep lots of funds on an exchange at the same time, we can get big freezes. So that's why you probably would have seen, 2021, 22, XYZ company has been able to recover multiple millions with the support of insert other XYZ company here. Whereas nowadays, like really, they're only keeping, even them keeping 6 figures, $100,000 on an exchange at any one time is a lot of money for them. So the sort of scale of the freezes that we're able to get is much smaller. So that's one way in which North Korea changed the way in which they act. But it's directed by what the crypto industry is doing in response, not necessarily what Taylor and I say on a podcast like this.
Okay. This is all just so fascinating. Honestly, Taylor's point about how they're in a low trust environment where they can't trust anybody, that definitely rings true to all the things that I've learned about North Korea, where, people can snitch on you and you and your family could go to prison for like 3 generations. Like you literally live out the rest of your days in a concentration camp, or you could be executed. I mean, there's so many crazy things. So yeah, very, very, very low trust environment there. So I also just wanted to ask, and I don't know if this is confirmed. I just saw people kind of like tweeting about it and some other things online, but I wasn't sure how, what the level of confidence was in this, but people were saying that it seemed like the hacker was this specific person named Park Jin-hyuk. Do you guys have do you have confidence in that? Or I couldn't figure out the accuracy of that. Taylor's shaking her head. No.
So he's like one of the hackers that has been identified in like public indictments previously. And I think there's like wanted posters of him. That dates back to like the Sony hack era.
Which wasn't a crypto. That was 2019 or so, or even earlier, actually, a lot earlier.
He was involved in, they traced him and sort of have his activity, his very specific activity from Sony through Bangladesh and then into the early crypto hacks. So I think NiceHash and like the 2017, 2018 era ones, they have sort of like linked through these, like his different email accounts and logins and infrastructure and stuff. However, it was a very different time back then. Like their sort of hacking operations, especially their crypto hacking operations, it was a much smaller operation, where today it's massive. I actually don't think that we could say that any one hack was perpetrated by like one North Korean hacker. These are large operations. They are operating as a team. They have different teams on different portions, right? So like the people that are doing the social engineering and messaging and doing the research about that, that's a completely separate team than the team that's designing the malware and going into the devices and exfiltrating the data and doing the observation and then writing new malware. And that's actually a completely separate team than the team that's actually like stealing the money, right? Like it's go time, let's go. That's a separate team. And that team also does like the very initial laundering or swapping out of assets. So if they steal, for example, a bunch of USDT, they swap out very quickly. That's like one. They take the money, they swap it out to usually the base asset to make sure they don't get frozen. And then they hand off to another team, which is like the laundering team. And so to say like this one guy is the hacker is just, it's not accurate, especially at this point.
Okay. Yeah. I couldn't for what I was seeing about it, I was like, wait, where are people getting this? And there was something about it where I was like, I don't know where this is coming from. So I'm glad that I asked. Okay. So let's now talk about kind of the real vulnerability, which is this social engineering. I know at least Jonty cannot talk about how it was that he thinks, or anybody at this moment thinks their systems actually got compromised. But Taylor, I don't know if you have ideas, or if you could just talk generally about like how the social engineering works, because I would imagine, literally, like I know even just for my tiny operation, like we're very, we're constantly talking about like, don't do this, don't do that. Like I would imagine if you work for a crypto exchange, then you're very, very buttoned up about all your internet behaviors. So like, what are some of the ways they manage to, social engineer these people?
Yeah. So with Trader specifically, I think people should understand that one, they have a lot of people sending a lot of messages, like a lot of different personas. A lot of people are doing research into the companies and the people at the companies. And then it's a bit of a numbers game, right? Like they are constantly, really constantly, aggressively sending messages to a huge number of people. Typically, we see them targeting engineers, developers, system admins, infrastructure guys, like more technical operations. And we will see them target and message and try to get initial access to multiple people at the same company simultaneously. So it's like a blanket attack on this one company. And so they're doing this very deep research on the company and then targeting all of the people that might work at that company. The other thing to keep in mind, like they're doing quite a bit of research. So they will not just send a random phishing link and hope that you click. They're doing research into not like the individual themselves and the company and their operations. So they'll be like, sometimes we've seen them ask about the specific stack. Like, hey, you have experience with AWS and Kubernetes, right? That's like an opening line that sort of disarms people a lot because like they're gonna, like it's a curious thing, right? And it's not an obvious phishing attempt.
But wait, without coming from like another compromised device, like it's from a person they think is friendly, or are they literally responding to a stranger asking that?
So sometimes it's a stranger, like a random person on like say LinkedIn. Sometimes they are impersonating maybe another system admin at a different exchange. Sometimes they use like job offers. Sometimes they ask for help. They're saying like, hey, like they'll act like a younger developer who needs help solving a problem with the code. They'll also evolve quickly based on like whether or not they're getting a response. And they'll also be very persistent and aggressive in terms of like repeatedly messaging. So if they don't get a response the first day during the first time, they'll try again 6 hours later, 8 hours later, maybe 2 days later. If the conversation falls off initially, they'll come back in a couple of days, like following up about it. And over time, I think people like it disarms them because I think people are expecting like a phishing link to be dropped. 2 weeks into a conversation, they may not understand like what this person's game is or what they're trying to do, but they're like, well, if they wanted to fish me, they would have already fished me. And so then they sort of like, well, it's just a younger developer who's, kind of annoying, but good faith. Or, wow, this guy really wants me to work for his company. Like, maybe I should send him my resume. Maybe I should see if this is a real, like, legit job offer. And it's so persistent. And it's also they're very knowledgeable. They're very good at what they do. That's all I'll say. Like, if you get on their radar, it's going to be pretty hard to completely avoid it forever, in my opinion.
I just wanted to make a point about something you said at the start regarding sort of security awareness at large crypto companies. I would actually slightly disagree with what you said. And I think that taking the crypto industry in general, it is at a particularly vulnerable point where crypto companies often have very substantial TVL and simply haven't grown the security function in their company or at their exchange or whatever to match that TVL. And often this is because crypto is ever evolving. These things happen really, really quickly overnight. So there just hasn't been time. Or I think the real issue is that security is very much an afterthought. We've said a lot on Twitter, both Taylor and I, very publicly, that security is often something people only care about after the incident. And as soon as you've had that big incident, then obviously your entire security posture and the way in which you go about it changes. But there are too many cases in crypto where really people need to start caring about security a lot more than they currently do before the incident. And I think that this is a sort of cultural thing that people like North Korea are exploiting massively, and it really needs to stop. I've tweeted publicly, I think this industry needs to get serious. We're at the point where if we want this to become like a big thing, and I very much do, right? But the way in which we're currently going in general about this is just not serious. I don't think it sounds like a joke when I say, oh, North Korea hacked someone for $1.5 billion. And we do make jokes about it all the time. We're very, very guilty of that. But really, there are really bad people in the world who are targeting you, and you need to be very aware of that fact and take the necessary precautions when you're handling billions of dollars of funds.
Yeah, when you said that sounds like a joke, like Taylor and I both did start laughing because it is just so bonkers. It's like, I don't know if you've ever been in a situation where something very serious happens and it's like so shocking, but people kind of laugh, and it's like a little bit of a nervous laughter thing. It's like your body needs to like release this like crazy tension, and you doing a laugh, but like it is something, it is so mind boggling. Like I remember in the Slack when somebody said, hey, like $1.5 billion has moved out of Bybit. We didn't know at first what the reason was. And when I realized it was a hack, it was like, I was just like all caps. I was like, oh my God, like, not whatever. You can imagine what I was saying, but I was just like, this is like so big. So one other thing that I wanted to mention about Taylor's comments about like how it is that they're targeting these kind of like lower level, technical people at these different companies is it sounds so similar to pig butchering, where it's basically like you just gain the trust over time and like you don't go in for the kill right away. And it's literally exactly the pig butchering playbook. And the other thing that struck me in the comments was just like, and I know she kind of said this already in a different way, but this is just actually exploiting the fact that outside of North Korea and probably maybe like China and I don't know, there's certain countries where like, the ones like people don't trust each other because they can't. But in our culture, we can, there's some level of trust everybody has, right? So like they are exploiting that. And it is a hard thing to change when you have grown up to, I think especially, I mean, now we're going to go down a rabbit hole, but I just want to say like briefly, I do think, well, I don't know, maybe it's just because I'm from the Midwest. So I do think that Americans, or at least certain portions of Americans, tend to be a lot more trusting than other cultures. I've noticed this a lot, like when I've traveled around the world. So, obviously this Bybit they're not American, but I do think that a lot of cultures aside from very specific countries in the world are more based on trust. So the one thing that I wanted to ask was like, obviously for such a huge amount of crypto, like how can they launder this? And why don't we start with how they typically launder? And then we can, look at this question of how they could launder this amount.
So I guess if we're talking specifically about North Korea, their ultimate goal is that they want cash. Crypto is not very useful for them. You can't buy parts for nuclear missiles with crypto yet. I mean, maybe one day, I don't know. But cash, and particularly foreign cash, you can. So things like Chinese yuan, US dollar is massively helpful for them. The way in which they go about that is, firstly, they have to obviously launder the funds. And the reason for that is because, as you probably rightly say, you're not going to find someone on a street corner who can exchange your $1.5 billion of crypto for cash. So they have to do this through a sort of pseudo-legitimate means. So North Korea will make use of the services that you and I make use of to launder their money. And then ultimately, they typically use a lot of OTC peer-to-peer traders based in Asia, particularly China, to actually ultimately swap that crypto for cash.
And wait, and just earlier when you said they use the services that we typically use to launder money, like I didn't know what that meant. I'm certainly not laundering money.
No, they are using the same services to launder their money that we use legitimately. And that's a really bad thing because it completely undermines the legitimate usage of particular services if they don't stop this stuff.
And just to be clear, you're probably talking about something like a Tornado Cash, like a mixer.
Oh, not even a Tornado Cash. I mean, mainstream exchanges or protocols. I mean, right now, I can say this: over $100 million has been laundered through a service called EXCH. EX is very integrated, sort of a network level with chain. So if you look at the Thorchain volume moving from ETH to Bitcoin in sort of the last 2 days, you'll see the overwhelming majority of it is related to this hack. And this is really bad because it completely undermines the legitimate uses of something like Thorchain to bridge your funds from one place to another. And we as an industry need to be really cognizant of the fact that if we don't start asking ourselves the question, what can we do to stop this? Then we're inviting, people like US government, for other governments around the world to ask that question for us. And I really don't want to see that happen.
All right. Well, so at this point, they have started to launder 100 million, but I did see that there were quite a number of partners who had also blocked funds. So can you tell us a little bit about those different partners, who they are and how much has been blocked or frozen?
Yeah, absolutely. So the biggest freeze so far was the Mantle team. So actually they, as part of the proceeds, they stole some Mantle stake ETH. Mantle was able to work very quickly to ensure that they weren't able to unstake those funds, and ultimately Bybit will recover those funds. In terms of other freezes, I mean, Bybit has been calling them out on their Twitter, but North Korea have been using some exchanges, particularly instant swap exchanges, to move funds from one chain to another. And we have been able to intercept some of those movements of funds. But honestly, the numbers are really small. Like compared to the amount that's being laundered, it's very small. And the reason for that is that they're primarily currently using this service EXCH, which is non-compliant and doesn't cooperate with us or law enforcement. And really, there's nothing we can do to stop that. But this doesn't mean to say that they are cashing out the funds. I'd like to point out this is just sort of the first stage of a very long, sort of multiple stages of laundering. But at present, that's where the funds are moving, and there's little we can do to stop it.
And just to understand how it is that the partners block the funds. So let's say, like, for instance, something like a Tether or a Circle, they need to wait for the funds to be swapped into their stablecoin before they can freeze them. So are they watching for any conversion whatsoever from that address? Because like, what if, so here's just like some kind of thought experiment. So, I don't know how this would happen, but let's say that they convert into that stable coin and then they're somehow able to cash out before Tether or Circle notices, or like, is there some way where like they could do the swap into the stable coin and then within, like 30 seconds or something swap out and like manage to hop through without getting the funds frozen? Or can they somehow right away freeze those funds just once they exist?
So like every single exchange, InstaSwapper, stablecoin, DeFi protocol, CeFi protocol, they're all different. And like one of the things that myself and Jonty and people like Zach do is figure out like what's possible, what people are willing to do, what their processes are. So for example, in this actual case, they did swap into Tether momentarily. And Tether was, and consistently is, to be honest, really on the ball. And so the process typically looks like someone notices that the funds have been swapped into Tether, someone works with Tether, and usually with like a law enforcement counterparty as well, to sort of like show all the pieces that need to be shown. Like these are stolen funds. They're clearly stolen funds. This is a serious situation. Please freeze these funds. Again, like everyone has different processes though. Circle's process for USDC is very different than Tether's process. And then once the sort of like, I guess, human process has been complete, right? Like they've verified and they're sufficiently confident that they should freeze these funds, then you actually have the technical part of it, which is that they have to get the signers to actually sign the transactions to freeze the funds, which is it's multiple people have to approve of the freeze, or not approve of it, but they have to like sign the transaction for the freeze. Sometimes, like in this case, everything just it comes together and you're able to freeze them before they swap out. In other cases, yeah, there's a delay somewhere, or someone's not certain about the source of funds, something gets tripped up, it's 2 a.m., like, things happen. And so they'll swap in, maybe they'll bridge it, maybe they'll like they're doing something, they're usually trying to bridge it when they're swapping into stables, and then they'll swap out before the freeze can land on chain. And this is super common. It's part of what we do is trying to move fast, and also trying to get the controls to be not quite so manual, right? Right now, it really is a lot of humans doing a lot of manual tracing and a lot of communication to make things happen, to slow down the hackers and to intercept the funds. Ideally, the industry over time has stronger processes and controls so that humans don't have to run around notifying protocols that Lazarus just deposited, $20 million into their exchange and praying that they do something about it.
Yeah, one thing that I will say is actually just hearing you talk makes me realize I don't think things have evolved that much since, I hate to say it, since 2016 and the DAO hack, because, and I don't remember how much of this I was able to put in my book, so I'll have to speak vaguely in case for various reasons, I'm not sure if I can say what all the details are here, but let's just say when the DAO hacker was cashing out, and again, this is on the Ethereum Classic chain because their funds were taken from them on Ethereum when it hard forked. But let's just say there was a place that the hacker was using, and there was like a person at that place who was kind of monitoring and able to keep the hacker from cashing out. But they weren't always online. So there were times when, yes, transactions went through, but they told me a little bit more about like the cat and mouse situation.
Yeah, I was just going to say, with regards to the cat and mouse, and this is going to sound really negative because I don't want to be. I'm very pro this industry, but in my eyes, we are certainly losing the cat and mouse game. Much like I think we need to get serious about security practices and preventing these incidents happening in the first place. Exchanges, services, protocols also need to get serious about the role that they're playing in laundering these funds, knowingly or unknowingly. And it is bad long-term outlook if we don't get ahead of this laundering now. It's not acceptable for major exchanges to launder large sums of DPRK or any stolen funds, especially when they know funds are stolen, when it's simply a process issue. Like, they don't have the processes or tooling in place to actively and effectively mitigate these problems. And there's various parts that come into this. So you could point at blockchain analytics companies, you can point at exchange compliance people themselves, but ultimately it's just we need to get serious. Like we need to start with seeing this as a problem, and then we can talk about like trying to develop the solution. And I think we're still like at the seeing this as a priority and a problem stage. No one wants to invest in compliance and security. It's not going to pump your bags, right? Right.
I did want to ask, though, I think both of you at various times in this conversation, I've also seen online that North Korea does not try to cash out in any hurry. Like they can keep funds before they try to cash out in various wallets for years, or I don't know how long, but for extended periods. So do you sort of expect that they'll just kind of bide their time until either nobody's looking or whatever, or they'll just gradually launder small bits, or what do you think the prospects are for them to actually get real money out of this?
I'm not going to speak on this because I didn't think that they would start laundering the money the night of. They literally stole the money, and 12 hours later, they immediately laundered 5,000 ETH. And then as soon as that 5,000 ETH was on Bitcoin, they did another 5,000, which is like they were moving so fast. Jonty, you can fill in the rest though. Like it's wild right now.
I genuinely think the only reason they sit on funds for a long time is like volume issues. Like it takes a lot of personnel and manpower to launder the amount of funds that they have. So it's not that I'm sure that they would like the cash immediately to put towards the nuclear weapon like program, but it's if they're not laundering the funds that we can see, I think it's fair to assume that there's some other funds you can't see that they are laundering. And actually, when you talk about the prospects of them converting this stuff into cash, a lot of that is entirely within our hands, like as an industry. I put the question back to the industry is like, how much do you want to care about stopping this stuff? Like, if everybody's eyes are on it, and actually, I think this could be a really good point. You take this horrific incident involving Bybit. Maybe this is the step change that we need to like people to start to care. And this is I'm making very blanket statements here. There are obviously big exceptions to these rules, and there are some people who are doing like a really good job. But I think, just in general, it's very much in our hands. And right now, I fear the probability of them getting cash is quite high.
Yeah, I expect them. Like if I had to guess, so here's the thing: the only blockers that they have to getting like sort of to cash is us. It's our protocols, it's our blockchains, it's our liquidity, it's our willingness to stop them. So, for example, if they're using InstaSwappers and nobody's stopping them, they will hurl 50K, 100K, 200K, 300K through the InstaSwappers to another chain for as long as they can, right? Until the InstaSwapper stops them. Once that happens, right? Like once they get frozen, no longer do they do 100K, 200K, 300K. They'll do 50K, right? 50K, 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 50K. If that gets frozen, again, they don't stop, right? Now they do 20K, 3K, 1K, $500, right? They just keep getting smaller, but they'll keep bombarding it because even though they're getting frozen one off, they'll sort of like, you can imagine a pile of funds and a whole bunch of different addresses. They'll just be hopping around and outrunning the different exchanges and what they can do. The issue is that the centralized entities got pretty good at stopping them. And so they eventually sort of gave up on those and have moved to, specifically for this situation and recent ones, right? EXCH and Thorchain. They can do with no risk of freeze. $1 million, $2 million, $3 million. EXCH, what did we say, Jonty? 100 million? 29,000 ETH?
North of 100 million in 2 days.
Yeah. So 48 hours, $100 million has gone through EXCH with no friction and no risk to the threat actors. The same goes for a lot of the DeFi protocols. And I understand that this industry is very, very morally opposed to any idea of like censorship. I'm not proposing that we permission our protocols, but I'm saying that if you let North Korean hackers steal money from our industry and then launder it to the tune of $100 million in 2 days, right? $50 million a day, that is a problem. And that is a problem for this industry. It is a problem for your protocol. And yes, you should fear the US government, but you should also fear the hackers, the thieves that are running circles around us, because you are also incentivizing them to continue to do this, right? Lazarus has pivoted their entire operations to crypto, to stealing crypto, right? Because it is the easiest way to steal, right? Our security posture is not strong enough, and they can actually get it to cash, right? If any of those things change, we're in a better position. But instead of really thinking deeply about how we can come up with creative solutions to slow them down, which does matter, right? It matters. If they can do 100 million versus 2 million, that's a massive difference. That's a massive win. Block them, create risk for them, freeze them. Those are all like that not only slows them down, it has an impact on the ROI. But if we just pretend that this isn't a problem or that we can't do anything, they are going to continue to do this, right? And you can do the math on how long it'll be, but they sold $1.5 billion. They've done $100 million plus in 2 days. It's going to take that long for them to finish the first stage of laundering. There's a few more stages after that. But eventually, inside this year, they will have 1.5. Well, if I had to guess, inside this year, if it continues on as it stands, they'll have $1.2, $1.3 billion in cash. That's a problem, in my opinion, and we should do something to stop it.
Oh, yeah. I mean, if the US government sanctioned tornado cash after $600 million was stolen, this is 2.5 times bigger, like for sure. I mean, no question. But Taylor, what do you, or either of you, what do you propose for DeFi? Because you're right, like that conversation, it's very controversial in the crypto world. So how would you propose they block funds in DeFi?
Yeah. So in my opinion, the conversation needs to shift, because a lot of times when I bring these conversations up, they ask me, what's the solution? I can offer solutions. I have a lot of ideas that I can throw out there, but I think that it is a horrible, terrible plan to invite outsiders into your protocol and your product's decision-making, right? I think that I have no stake in the game. In fact, I have opposite stake in the game. Like, I'm chasing the bad guys that are using you. Don't invite me to go deeply look at your protocol and find the weak points and then tell you what to do. I think that it's a much better plan if you invite the people that are aligned, that have stake in the game, to come up with, again, these really creative solutions that don't undermine the sanctity of your protocol, right? If your end goal is to create a permissionless protocol that like anyone can use, or that, empowers people, whatever it is, right? That's like the one side of this. The other side is that, hey, it turns out that when people steal money from each other, that's not what we want to do. That's not empowering people. Where's the balance? What are the levers? How do we de-risk, right? How do we make sure we don't exclude legitimate people while still blocking out the stolen funds? There's a huge amount of things that protocols can do without like turning on KYC. But until we're ready to have that conversation, we can't come up with those solutions. And again, stop inviting other people into your protocol. You guys have to do it yourselves. Like, you have to figure it out yourselves. I'm happy to like give my thoughts and stuff, but the habit of saying it's not a problem and then sort of like demanding an answer from outside people who are not aligned with your protocol, like, again, terrible idea.
But when you say that you're not aligned with their protocol, I don't, that doesn't make sense to me, because.
Well, so like, for example, if you're a random DeFi protocol that's spun up in the last 2 years, right, that people are using to bridge or lend or stake or whatever, right? I don't own your token. I don't know you. I don't know your team. I don't know your inner workings. I don't know your values. I'm not part of your culture. I'm somewhere between slightly annoyed and completely pissed off that you are letting Lazarus run circles through your protocol, right? I like, by definition, I'm not aligned. And by the way, like, I am more aligned than, say, some of the guys at the FBI who have been doing this for decades and look at this industry like we're a complete joke, right? And so that's what I mean by, like, ideally the people who have designed the protocol, who are maintaining the protocol, who are trying to improve the protocol, who own the token, those are the people that have stake in the game. Right now, they're just not willing to say that Lazarus laundering millions of dollars through their protocol is a problem. And so they're not even trying to address it. That's, in my opinion, that's the blocker for most of DeFi right now. And if they were to say that it was a problem, in the same way that this industry has accepted that MEV is a problem, same way that this industry has accepted that smart contract hacks are a problem, I think that you would see a huge amount of very creative solutions that, again, solve the problem without completely neutering the protocol. We have to get there in the same way that we've solved other really, really, really hard problems.
Just to take a positive here. Call out one protocol that's done a really good thing. In that, I'm going to say that's Railgun. If we look back in 2023, Railgun had a big incident whereby North Korea deposited funds stolen from the Harmony Horizon Bridge into Railgun, and they had no controls in place basically to stop that. What they have developed since, they took their protocol offline for a while, and then they came back and they essentially introduced a concept called private proofs of innocence. So this is a tool that allows cryptographic assurance that tokens entering Railgun smart contracts, but not on any block lists or not known to be associated with illicit funds. This is great because it doesn't, in my view, the permissionless, decentralized nature of Railgun, it doesn't harm its integrity, but it does allow them a lever that they can pull when someone like North Korea starts to abuse their protocol. And this has a tangible effect. Like, we haven't seen Trader in volumes like that go back to Railgun. And sure, we can have conversations about how effective it is, how we can improve the monitoring, but like the fact that they have the tooling in place to do that and they're a decentralized protocol is really cool. And I think that's an example of a creative solution that was thought about by a decentralized privacy protocol that wanted to solve this problem. And I'm sure, I don't know the inner workings of every single DeFi protocol, but I'm sure that there are solutions for most protocols out there if they genuinely want to go and design them.
That's super interesting. I agree that sounds like a good solution for North Korea. I could see it being more controversial for ones where whether or not the actor is considered bad or not is like more up for debate. So yeah, I find it interesting. But so you guys, we're at like about an hour and a half in. So why don't we wrap up with like any remaining tips or just thoughts that you have about what direction the industry should go to prevent more of these hacks, or to basically just, not be, what's the word, not to be so readily exploitable by the North Koreans.
That's a perfect way to put it, actually. So I think I've had this opinion for a long time. I've probably said it on this podcast before, but like, this industry at the end of the day is actually really deeply amazing. There are so many smart people. There are so many smart teams. There are so many things that we have done that, quite frankly, should not have been possible, right? We can do anything that we want. That's it. In my opinion, having North Korea run circles, right, and spin up new hacking teams, right, they are now fully incentivized to just deluge this industry, is a bad plan for this industry. And so I think that we should prioritize, one, getting really serious about security, understanding that the incentive is there. If you have $1 million, $50 million, $1 billion, the incentive is there for people to try to take that money, and you need to be aware of it and take really tangible steps, right, to actually put controls on your internal systems, on your employees, on your devices. There's a huge amount of literature. There's a huge amount of experienced security professionals out there who will do it for you. Actually do it. Don't think that it's not a risk. It really, truly is a risk. And then secondly, I would honestly just ask this industry to stop having the debate over whether or not this is bad. Like, when people have money stolen from them, that's bad. And like, for now, let's just stick to theft, right? The Bybit hack is bad. The money was stolen. It's bad. What can we do to lower the incentive for them to do it again? What can we do to make it harder for them to like hack again? But also, what can we do to slow them down on the laundering front so that, again, they don't get $1 billion to cash inside of a year, right? What can we do about that? Let's all acknowledge that it's bad and stop having the debate over whether or not it's bad, and move on to, okay, it's not ideal. What can we do about it? And again, get really creative with the solutions and don't undermine the values of the ecosystem. Please do not, please do not undermine everything. When we talk about creative solutions, It means accomplishing the goals, getting the outcomes that we want without sacrificing everything that we stand for. We have to do both. We can do both. We just have to put our minds to it together.
Yeah, I guess closing thoughts from me. Whilst I've made some, very general statements here, maybe they're not always positive. What I would say is that there are people in this industry who care very, very deeply about security, preventing these hacks, preventing this laundering, that are ready and willing to help you, often for free, often or at limited cost. So let's work together on this. We can't give you the solution to how you can stop your DeFi protocol from being abused by North Korea, but we're certainly willing to work with you. And if there is some solution you come up with that we can help in any way, absolutely lean on us. So yeah, reach out to Zero Shadow, reach out to the Security Alliance. Is something that Taylor and I both contribute to. But we can't just sit here and pretend it's not a problem, because that will just spell the end to crypto, unfortunately.
Yeah. Okay, you guys, this has been just so fascinating. Thank you both. Where can people learn more about each of you and your work?
I'm on Twitter, Tavano with an _. Yeah, DMs are always open. Feel free to reach out no matter what.
Yeah, I'm also on Twitter, Tanuki42, with also an _, but you can also reach out to Zero Shadow at zeroshadow.io.
Okay, perfect. All right, well, thank you both so much for coming on Unchained.
Thank you, Laura.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks so much for joining us today. To learn more about Taylor, Jonty, and the Bybit hack, check out the show notes for this episode. Unchained is produced by me, Laura Shin, with help from Matt Pilchard, Juan Urbanovich, Megan Gavis, Pam Majumdar, and Margaret Correa. Thanks for listening.